There we go.
So, good evening, everybody. I'd like to welcome you. My name is Kelly O'Grady to the Brain Injury Association of Waterloo-Wellington presentation with Ashley and Brenda. Now, Ashley and Brenda are actually the co-authors of two books. A little bit about Ashley. Ashley is a survivor of a catastrophic brain injury. She's also a BIAWW board member and daughter to Brenda. Brenda is a BIAWW volunteer, as well as the mother to um, Ashley, and she was the caregiver. So they're going to share their inspiring story with us. And I just wanted to let you know at the end of this recording or at the end of the presentation, I will stop the recording and we'll invite people in to ask questions after the recording has stopped. Tomorrow, I'll send out an email to everybody along with the slides that they'll be presenting tonight. Any questions? So thank you very much for joining us tonight, and please go ahead.
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Kelly, for inviting us to share our story. In our presentation tonight, we will start by sharing a bit about our family's journey after Ashley's accident. Ashley sharing her perspective as survivor and me as caregiver. We will then share about our writing experience. You will have an opportunity to ask questions at the end of our presentation. On August 14th, 2000, my 17-year-old daughter, Ashley, was in a catastrophic motor vehicle accident on a bridge in Conestoga, not far from our home. Earlier that day, I had been riding my bike beside Ashley on her way to her summer job working on the trails in our community. We said our goodbyes in the middle of the bridge, exactly where the car accident happened a few hours later. She was airlifted first to Hamilton and then to Toronto Sick Kids Hospital. A friend drove my husband Ross, our 18-year-old son Chad, and myself to both hospitals. Ashley was very seriously injured with 24 broken bones in her head and a shattered right elbow. She was in a coma. There were a lot of unknowns. First, was she going to live? If she did, they said she would certainly have brain injury, and they weren't sure about her vision. She survived the first 48 hours, which was reason for hope. She emerged slowly from her coma after 12 days, and they started doing tests that revealed she did in fact have memory and cognitive issues, as well as vision loss. She lost 3/4 of her vision, which was devastating. She had surgery to put her elbow and tricep muscle back together. Because she had so many broken bones in her head, cerebral spinal fluid started to leak out through her nose. This had to be repaired because if spinal fluid has a way out, then bacteria has a way into the brain, which would result in meningitis. She had many, many surgeries to repair this leak, including a craniotomy. Her pituitary was injured, which resulted in her having diabetes insipidus, which is a fluid balance problem that she has to take medication for the rest of her life. She completely lost her sense of smell, too, and suffers from intense fatigue. Ashley's first stay in the hospital was almost 3 months, and in the first year after the accident, her and I were in Toronto at Sick Kids and then Bloorview for rehab for a large part of that year. We were fortunate that Ashley was very cooperative and positive and still is a cup half full person. My husband ran an electrical business and I was the secretary and did the books for it. During this time, I still did my job and was often doing the books in Toronto at Sick Kids when Ashley took a nap.
As my mom said, I was in a coma for 12 days. Waking up from a coma does not happen like it does in the movies. It takes days, and there are different stages throughout the process. Overall, I've lost about a month of memory after the accident, and thankfully, I do not remember the accident itself. It's hard for me to know what my first memory is following the collision. Do I know something because I remember it, or because I have been told about it multiple times? What stands out in my mind as my first memory is regarding my vision. I was sitting in the hospital bed having a bagel, and I asked Mom, "Is my right eye open?" To which she replied, "Yes, it is, sweetheart." I was in the process of discovering for myself about my vision loss. My right eye is completely blind, and I have no peripheral vision in my left eye. If you picture the world in front of me as a clock, I can see from 12 to 2. I had to relearn how to walk with my reduced vision. Mom said I had a difficult time walking in a straight line and would end up nearly pushing her against the wall when she was walking beside me at the hospital. I also have difficulty with depth perception. It didn't take long for Mom to realize she essentially had to be my eyes as I adjusted to my vision loss. She would let me know about things that were in my peripheral vision that I didn't see, or tell me if there was a curb or something I might miss because of my lack of depth perception. Mom supporting me and helping me with my vision loss enabled me to stay safe while I adjusted life with low vision.
There were some very intense and nerve-wracking times. When I think back, much of the first year and even beyond were tense. Everyone handles stress differently. I tend to look at the big picture, and as Ashley's mother and caregiver, I was usually keeping track of her schedule, therapist and doctor appointments, doing arm exercises with her, on and on. I should mention that I have a medical background, so this was probably easier for me to do than some caregivers. When things became very tense, such as when she had a surgery to stop the cerebral spinal fluid or CSF leak, a 7 to 10 day spinal drain would follow. Ashley had to lay flat in bed the whole time with a drain in her lower spine collecting CSF, which took pressure off while the surgery was hopefully healing the leak. At this time, Ross and I did everything for her. Then the nerve-wracking part came, waiting to see if anything dripped from her nose that might look like CSF, which is like water. During these times, we had our motto, one day at a time. There were periods of time when we were able to only manage to get through 1 hour at a time. We certainly could only have enough mind space and emotional capacity for what was going on that particular day.
After the accident, I spent 80 days in the hospital, where I underwent numerous procedures, tests, surgeries, and therapies. If I focused on the big picture, it was easy for me to become overwhelmed. I tried my best to break things down into more manageable parts. I call this compartmentalizing. If, for example, I was having an upcoming surgery, I let myself focus on that and put other concerns, such as my low vision, on the back burner. One of the reasons I was able to do this was because of my mom's consistent and in-depth care for me. I knew that if something needed to be done or followed through with, she would ensure that it happened. During my time in the hospital, I became more and more aware of the medical conditions I now had and the ways in which my life had changed. For months, my life solely existed in the hospital. For days on end, my world was simply my hospital room. As I continued to recover and heal, I began the process of grieving. My understanding of grieving up until that point was that it was something that happened after a loved one passed away. The truth was, I needed to grieve the aspects of myself that I had lost in the accident. For example, growing up, I was an athlete and found my identity in that. Because of my low vision, I would not be able to play competitive soccer like I used to. If not an athlete, who would I be? Because of my low vision, I also lost my driver's license. I lived in the country and no longer had the ability to drive. Losing my license indicated a loss of independence. Bit by bit, I was beginning to realize that I was not the same person as before the accident, nor would I be the same person as before my injuries. That was heavy and needed to be grieved. The grieving process looks different for everyone. There is no right or wrong way to grieve.
Following Ashley's accident, she had to grieve what she had lost. I tried to help her with this, but we also had counseling, which was very beneficial. Because Ashley lost so much and was often going through surgeries, she didn't fully grieve right after the accident. For example, It was maybe 18 months after the accident when she processed and understood her vision loss and what it entailed. She had to learn how to get around with her limited vision and had a prism on her glasses, but hadn't fully accepted what she lost. A part of it was she could no longer drive. This would have a huge impact on her life. We live in the country, so we have to drive anywhere we go. This meant I had to drive her everywhere, and I often still do. Throughout the years following the accident, all members of our family at some point received counseling. Having the support of a counselor meant that we weren't the only ones holding each other up. We all had our own struggles to work through. After the accident, I became full-time caregiver on and off for years. This meant I lost independence that I had been looking forward to at this point in my life. Another thing I needed to adjust to was Ashley's new personality. When she was younger, she was shy. That was her nature. After the accident and her frontal lobe brain injury, she became very verbose. She talked nonstop all day long. This was new and could drive a person crazy at times, especially since I spent all day with her. She couldn't control it as it was part of her brain injury. Ashley had quite a bit of speech therapy and was provided with strategies for this, but that was later. After the accident, she was very chatty, saying everything that was on her mind. She had limited filters. Though what she was saying was not always on topic, it was at least appropriate. If she had a new audience or if she was tired, it was worse. She had learned to curtail this significantly. When she first went off to university, she would call me 5 times a day to tell me every detail of what was going on. Now we talk at 9:15 every morning, and I enjoy touching base with her.
If any of you have had brain injury yourself, I can only imagine how intimately aware you are of the intense fatigue that comes along with it. At first, I thought I got tired so easily because my body was healing from all the injuries I had sustained. While that was true, there's a lot of fatigue that comes with brain injury. My brain needed to find a different route or pathway to do things that were second nature to me before the accident. I had a huge adjustment to getting around the world with limited vision. Of course, I got tired easily. What I quickly learned was that it is a type of fatigue that cannot be overcome. It is an insurmountable wall. Once my body is tired, I must give it the rest it needs. My mom became extremely aware of this fatigue and knew that if, for example, we were shopping and I told her I was tired, she needed to have me home within half an hour. I remember one day we had to go to Toronto for doctor's appointments. I always found these days tiring, particularly because of navigating a busy city with my low vision. After the appointments were done, we went to Sears to do a bit of shopping. Mom went into a change room to try something on. When she came out to get my opinion, she found me sitting on a chair, fast asleep. My body told me it was out of energy, and I was left with no other choice. If I do try to push through my fatigue, some of my brain injury symptoms become more prevalent. For example, because of the part of my brain that was injured, I am considerably more talkative or verbose than I used to be. When I get tired, I talk more. While talking more isn't in itself a bad thing, I often feel bad when I become verbose because I dominate the conversation and don't let others have a chance to speak. All this is one of the many ways my life is different with brain injury.
Early on in Ashley's recovery, I realized how busy her days were with constant therapies, physio, speech, occupational therapy, arm exercises, and on and on. I thought it can't all be work. There needs to be some fun too. Ashley loves playing board games, so that became a part of our day. Some of it was actually therapy for her vision, but she didn't need to know that. The biggest piece of advice I can give to other survivors and caregivers is to include self-care. This can be simple things like phoning a friend or going for a walk or going shopping, whatever makes you rejuvenate. It is imperative so you don't burn out along the way. I'm not always good at self-care and have to remind myself, as I have some health issues now too.
It is challenging, but very important to both recognize boundaries and limitations and be willing to ask for help when needed. As I previously mentioned, I find going to Toronto challenging and overwhelming because of my low vision. Over the years, I have learned to ask for help. A typical scenario now when I go to Toronto is for me to hold on to the arm of whoever I am with and also use my white cane. My white cane is called an identicane and helps others to know I need a bit more space and might need a bit more time. Another challenging thing for me to learn was to adjust my self-expectations. Many things in life now took more time, energy, and resources. Over the years, I created a life motto. Just because I have to do something differently doesn't mean I can't do it. A prime example of this is the fact that it took me 10 years to graduate from a university program that took most students 4. The thing is, when I graduated, I had the same diploma all the other students did. My life might look different, but is still very fulfilling and rewarding. Now, let's talk about advocacy. Initially, my mom was my primary advocate. She ensured that all my health needs were being met and that things that needed to be followed through with were. As my recovery continued, her advocacy expanded to include supporting my low vision. I learned how to self-advocate by watching Mom advocate on my behalf. The trick was, there were times I knew how to advocate, but wasn't willing to. For example, while at school, letting others know about my low vision enabled them to support me, but also made me feel like I stood out. After the accident, it felt like everything in my life had changed. My identity had changed from being an athlete to the girl who had been in the bad car accident. I wanted to fit in. I longed to fit in. Having a large print textbook the size of my desk did not work with this desire. Over the years, I learned that standing out did not have to be a bad thing. Advocating for myself helps to raise awareness of how brain injury and low vision affects someone's life. It also helps to keep me safe. In my purse, I have what I call my medical envelope. It has information about my medications, the surgeries I have had, my doctor's contact info, and any other info that might be helpful in an emergency. Me having this on hand gives both my mom and I peace of mind. Advocacy can take on different shapes and forms. You could even say that our books are a form of advocacy. They are sharing our life experiences that in turn will hopefully raise awareness and increase support for those living with brain injury.
Ashley and I have co-authored 2 books about our journey following her accident. The first book is called The Way I See Things and takes you from the accident to her getting ready for university. A second book is titled Looking Forward and encapsulates her time at university. Kelly has mentioned some of you might be interested in sharing your story. Throughout the remainder of our presentation, we have a few questions for you to consider before deciding whether or not to share your story. The first one is, if you are considering sharing your story, why? For me, it was when Ashley was in the hospital, I longed for books to read about how others got through scenarios similar to ours. Ashley was being filmed for a show called Life's Little Miracles. That is a documentary profiling children who are being treated at Sick Kids Hospital. When Ashley came out of her coma and could understand what we were asking, she said out of respect for her friend Mike, who died in the accident, she didn't want it aired. We honored that decision. We had been assigned a counselor at the hospital who shared with me how remarkable Ashley's story is and encouraged me to write it. After all, I had been keeping a journal since we arrived at the hospital. I wanted this to not only be a resource for others experiencing trauma, but also a way to offer help and hope.
Another important thing to consider before starting to write your story is, who is your audience? If your intention is to only share it with close friends and family, then maybe you don't need to worry about getting it professionally published. Is your desire for it to help with advocacy efforts? If so, a blog might be more effective than a memoir. When Mom and I decided to share our story, we wanted it to be accessible for individuals with low vision. so we intentionally used a larger font and a style of print that is easier to read. Determining who your audience is will also help you determine what info to include. For example, if you are primarily sharing it with family and friends, then you might not want to include as many medical details that they might not be able to understand.
The journal I was keeping at the hospital primarily was medical facts of what was happening to Ashley. This made it difficult when I started writing the book to recall emotions I was feeling at the time and to describe the setting. Ashley, on the other hand, was writing purely from memories and had to let them be her guide. Sometimes, as a coping strategy, her mind and heart tried to not remember a surgery, for example, which meant she was unable to write about that experience. We are sharing this with you to encourage you to keep an emotion journal. It will be beneficial throughout the writing process in helping you to capture how you were feeling in the moment. Another factor to consider is whether or not you have a legal case that has been settled or not. For example, we have signed a non-disclosure agreement to not reveal any details about Ashley's settlement.
I don't want you to get discouraged by what I'm about to say, but I'm going to be honest with you. If you decide to write your story, it will most likely take longer than you think it will, and it will never be far from your mind. It might dredge up things you thought you had emotionally processed, but still need to be addressed. So you need to determine if you have the emotional capacity and time needed to invest in this project. You also need to be willing to prioritize your own health, which might mean you need to set your writing aside temporarily. Over the 25 years it took us to write the 2 books, there were countless times I needed to put the writing process on hold while I attended to health concerns. There were challenging parts to writing our story, but there were also extremely rewarding, healing, and therapeutic aspects as well. I just want you to have an idea of the full picture before you take the first step.
Consider what impact sharing your story will have on your loved ones. Another thing you need to consider is whether or not you have permission to use people's names. We hired a lawyer to create a permission form that we presented to everyone we wanted to include in the book. While most individuals said yes, there were 2 doctors that declined, which meant we had to use another name for them to hide their identity. You need to be mindful of how you speak of hospitals and therapy centers so it doesn't come back on you.
Now that we've got all that out of the way, let's talk about the actual process of writing. It is crucial to write what you know. You are sharing your lived experience, which needs to be accurate to be helpful. You might be asking, what about the parts of my story that make me look bad? Should I include them? We included the good, the bad, and the ugly, which definitely made us vulnerable, but also more relatable. In the numerous writing workshops we participated in, we were always told, show, don't tell. What this means is to include details about the 5 senses to bring the reader into the story, rather than just listing what happened.
We learned a lot of things the hard way. In the beginning, I was repetitively told just to write it all down. So that's what I did. And it ended up being over 550 pages. This presented us with the challenge of editing out content while remaining true to the story. As it turned out, it would have been beneficial for us to have had a story outline or plot graph as reference from the beginning. Your writing should have an overall theme that you're trying to get across. For our second book, it was Ashley's gaining independence. We've referred to this theme throughout the writing process to help us determine what to include in the story. The next thing we would like to review with you is helpful things to keep in mind. You might need to take classes or workshops to learn the skill, and you should expect to have multiple drafts. When you're satisfied with your writing, we highly recommend you have it edited. It is extremely beneficial to have a fresh set of eyes with editing skills to review and provide feedback. Make a decision to write in either past or present tense and be consistent throughout your story. When you begin the writing process, Establish a way you will save your documents and do backups. If you look at either of our computers, it's almost comical how many different ways and places we saved our work. Part of the challenge was that there were two of us working on the manuscript, and one of us, that being me, not very computer savvy. Once your story is out there, be ready to answer questions about it. I particularly experienced that because of living in a small community. So that could be anywhere. Sometime I'd run into somebody at the grocery store or the doctor's office and they'd ask me questions. You also need to remember that sharing your story doesn't mean that others will understand your challenges. For example, Ashley behaves like a full-sighted person, so people assume she sees things that she actually doesn't. You also can't assume that friends and family will want to or be able to read your story. It might be too emotional for them. For example, a few close family members and friends have never read either of our books, and we respect that.
The final piece we want to share with you are reflections we have about sharing our story. One of the benefits of writing our story is that it helped me fill in some of the blanks I had surrounding the month of memory loss I had due to the accident and coma. It also helped bring meaning and closure to some of our experiences. One example of this is conversations my mom and I had when writing the book regarding my vision and her understanding what I truly see. The result of this was me finding words to accurately convey my vision to others. Vision loss is similar to brain injury and intense fatigue in that they are invisible and difficult for others to understand. Sharing our story helped me to find words to describe the invisible. Feeling you are not alone in your recovery journey is so important. Becoming involved with the Brain Injury Association of Waterloo-Wellington gave both Mom and I an opportunity to be with other people who truly comprehend what it means to live with brain injury. One of the main reasons we chose to write our story is to use our life experiences to help others and hopefully have a positive impact. Writing your story is only one of the many ways you can do that. One of the main things I want you to remember is to count all successes, no matter how small, in recovery, writing, and all aspects of life. This is a slide here that has information about our website and options on how to purchase our book. On our website, there's purchasing the physical copy or the ebook, and there's also the opportunity to purchase it from the Brain Injury Association of Waterloo-Wellington's office. As Kelly mentioned, this information will be sent out to you in an email tomorrow. And now we have an opportunity to ask questions if anyone has anything they want to chat about.
Okay, well, thank you so much. Can you see me?
Yes?
Yes.
Okay, so thank you so much for the presentation. It was fantastic. I highly recommend their books. And it is an incredibly inspiring story, because so many people feel that if you've had a brain injury such as that, often your life is over. And Ashley proves them wrong. And also Brenda's perspective of being a caregiver, because it is definitely difficult. So thank you so much. Really appreciate you taking the time. So now I'm going to stop the recording and we'll open up the floor for questions. Thank you.